For more on the scourge of kidnappings and assassinations in South Africa, I'm joined by Chad Thomas, IRS investigator. Chad, good to speak to you this afternoon. Now, when we talk about an increase in kidnappings and assassinations, how much of this is a result of failure by the police in South Africa?
Good afternoon, Hugo, and good afternoon to the viewers. Look, we are saturated with crime in South Africa, and it's not just local crime syndicates. When one looks at the takedown of a kidnapping syndicate recently, 2 of those arrested were on Interpol's red notice. They were Chinese nationals. In the massive drug bust you spoke of earlier in the bulletin that occurred in Limpopo, 2 of those arrested were Mexican. We've heard word that a South African gang leader from Cape Town who was kidnapped in Gauteng was kidnapped by a Colombian drug cartel. So we've got this manifestation of transnational organized crime syndicates setting up shop in South Africa, and we don't have sufficient policing capacity. If one looks at the per capita ratio of police to citizens, we are far, far below the prescribed number that one would see internationally. And those international countries that do actually meet the criteria of having the correct amount of police officers per 100,000 citizens don't have the added burden of the violent crime that South Africa is currently undergoing. So we have far too few police officers, we have far too few qualified detectives, we have far too few prosecutors, courtrooms, prisons, and it seems as if at this point in time, we're in the eye of a perfect storm when it comes to organized crime, such as kidnapping and murder for hire.
So one of the things that's changed in the last few weeks is that there's a new police minister, Senzo Mchunu. The assumption is that a new broom is likely to sweep clean. We've seen engagement that an engagement drive that he's on in the Cape Flats at the moment to speak to communities and deal with those challenges. So how much of our problem is administrative? I mean, you've given us an outline of capacity. We lack capacity in a number of areas, and one of those is the boots to people ratio, which is extremely high. So let's talk about what the police minister can do to curb at least a significant part of these crime levels that we're experiencing.
He's currently saying all the right things, and he's meeting with the media, and he is far more approachable than his predecessor. Minister Mchunu has a lot on his plate, and he's going to have to look at the police force from a holistic perspective. If you look at the police force currently, there's about 180,000 members, of which 150,000 are meant to be operational. Far too few. Our previous minister was very disingenuous when he used to speak about more boots on the ground, because he didn't speak about the natural attrition of members that were retiring or leaving to go to the private sector, or just frustrated with the fact that they weren't successful in their investigation endeavors. As it stands right now, we've got a skills deficit and a shortage of detectives. It doesn't help when we hear that Operation Chanela last year arrested 600,000 people for various crimes, because we don't see 600,000 prosecutions. So what happens after those arrests are made? So our minister needs to look for guidance to the private sector, and we're seeing a lot of movement towards the simplification of public-private partnerships. There is already a public-private partnership that exists between the police and the private security sector known as E2, which stands for Eyes and Ears. And I can see in the coming months there will be a lot more of these type of projects, simply because the police are not capable of doing it on their own during the next short term.
Now, there's a recent arrest of 14 individuals in connection with the kidnapping of a Soweto businessman. Are we doing the right things in some instances, or is this just a drop in the ocean?
It's a drop in the ocean, but kudos must be given. That particular unit was the National Office of Crime Intelligence, headed up by Major General Feroz Khan. And he's been spearheading these public-private partnerships. He's been spearheading multidisciplinary interagency task teams that have members from all levels of state law enforcement, as well as from the private sector. And it's these kind of partnerships that will work. But you made the point, is it a drop in the ocean? The answer is yes. Crime intelligence is only capacitated to a certain level. Just like the Hawks, they also need more budgets. Just like detective services, they need more budgets. They need more resources, and they literally need a skills transfer from the experienced members to the new members who are picking up the baton.
So there's certain business communities like the Portuguese that are being targeted. Do you have an idea why?
Cash businesses. If you look at the Portuguese community, they're very strong in the cash businesses of butchers, greengrocers, bottle stores. But the same can be said for the Muslim community. The Muslims are also targeted, and they own a lot of wholesale distributors, fast-moving consumer goods. So you're seeing businessmen who are targeted, whose businesses are in the very cash-rich environment. And the kidnappers have inside information. So they know that these communities will club together and they can make the resources available to pay the ransoms. Hence the increase we're seeing in so-called copycat syndicates that are spiraling out of control and popping up everywhere. And these syndicates are not just targeting affluent businessmen. They're also targeting middle-class suburbia. They're targeting people that are living in informal settlements. The only difference is the amounts that they're asking for the ransoms. Ransoms can range from a few thousand rand to tens of millions of rands.
Finally, Chad, let's talk about the foreign nationals that are involved in various crimes in the country, just outside of kidnapping. The Chinese nationals that we've talked about, the drug bust that involves the Mexicans, for instance. Is the landscape getting that more difficult, that more complicated with the arrival of international syndicates?
Most definitely. These international syndicates are treating South Africa as their playground. We are currently a transshipment point for drugs coming from South America destined for Australia. They get repackaged in South Africa. We're a transshipment point for drugs coming from Pakistan and Afghanistan, which is repackaged in South Africa and then sold onto international heroin markets. So cocaine and heroin are repackaged in South Africa and then sent on to other destinations. You then have other types of criminals that have made South Africa their home, whether it's international boiler room scams, financial scams, Ponzi schemes. We're seeing this massive growth. And the greatest concern that we have is that they also play out proxy turf wars on our territory. It's easier for them to take out one another and for innocent people to get caught up in the so-called crossfire than it is for them to do in their own home countries. So we've now become a gangland for proxy wars between these international crime syndicates. So our minister and our commissioner have a lot on their plate, but what they do have is the buy-in from the private sector and the buy-in from the public at large to say enough is enough and to try to turn this tide on crime.